l'immagine di Cosimo, colui che...
In a way, the portrait of Grand Duke Cosimo, looking down on us from the central panel of the 39 covering the ceiling of the hall of the Grand Council of 500, marks a crucial stage in the history of Florence up to the mid-16th century. That's when the city's main assembly room was built. The place has an unusual feature. Instead of religious symbols, it's bordered by the crests of the city's 21 guilds. It was these guilds that gave birth to firms that have maintained their original names, symbols, and origins, as they were handed down from father to son, as well as their creative capabilities. Some of them have now joined together to form an association, contributing to Florence's international image. Our city's economy is still essentially based on trade and handicrafts. These historic firms are concrete evidence of the link between ancient and modern.
Salve.
Hello there. Yes, it's me, Philippe Leroy. You may remember me. I had the honor, some years ago now, of playing the role of Leonardo da Vinci here in this enchanting place. They're still looking for his lost Battle of Anghiari, a major fresco Leonardo painted, mixing paint and wax. To dry it, he had some large braziers lit. Unfortunately, the heat melted the wax, and the fresco was lost. As I was saying, well, I'm sure you recognize it here. We are in the hall of the Grand Council of the 500, where the Medici rulers received the world leaders of the time. Now, over here, we have an even more interesting room. This tiny space encloses the sum total of Florentine ingenuity. All that is excellent, from the most abstract theory to the most skillful practice in the arts and sciences, is to be found here. This is the studiolo of Grand Duke Francesco I. It's a secret, secluded place, even though it is so close to the hall of the Grand Council. Around the year 1570, Francesco had assembled all the knowledge of his time here, the skills of Florence's artists and craftsmen. He wanted the best research behind the production of artificial minerals, fragrant essences, distilled liqueurs, and prize wines. He kept the rarest, most valuable books, as well as gold and precious stones and fabrics. Perhaps the only thing that was missing was the modern magic of photography. Florentines have always been fascinated by science. From Leonardo to the great Galileo, observing the heavens through his telescope. Florence can boast many famous scientists. The Tribuna at the Specola Museum can tell us all about them. The roots of the city's historical firms lie in this combination of skilled craftsmanship, science, and sophisticated research. In each of them, we can find that outstanding excellence that Grand Duke Francesco wanted to surround himself with, entrusting the best craftsmen with the task of changing the world. Human beings have always been fascinated by precious stones. By the mid-14th century, Florentine goldsmiths had already reached the peak of excellence in this, the noblest, most all-embracing of crafts. In 1369, Jacopus Torini from Scarperia registered his trademark in Florence with the guild of smiths, armorers, and nail makers, starting off the work of a dynasty of goldsmiths that has lasted right up to the present. The perfection of form of the great monuments of medieval Florence is still mirrored in the miniature masterpieces of the goldsmith's craft. In the 15th century, Florence was the leading center of this craft. The greatest artist craftsmen of the time were to be found in the city's workshops. The goldsmiths' workshops turned precious material into authentic treasures. The same skill is to be seen in the jewelry that, from its medieval origins, reaches the sophisticated designs of the present day. Design and technique may be different, but the rules laid down by the great Benvenuto Cellini are still followed. The Torini workshop still mints the gold florins which the city lent to the whole of medieval Europe. The ancient cera persa, or lost wax casting process, still follows in the steps of Renaissance goldsmiths. The molten gold flows along the gaps left by the wax and fills modern molds. Gradually, it recovers its magnetic color and seductive qualities. Banquets are also a typical feature of the city's history. And behind the name Frescobaldi, a tradition in art, culture, and Italian and Tuscan history stretches back over 700 years. In the family's country house, the villa at Poggio a Remole, we can still picture the banquets held in the large dining room, where high-quality wines were served to renowned guests. Tuscans have been making wine for thousands of years and have always done their best to improve this delicate product. The town home of generations of the Frescobaldi family stands in the Santo Spirito district of Florence. The palazzo and the church are closely linked, clear evidence of the special tie the family has with this part of the city. Wine and the most ancient leading noble families are inseparably intertwined. Giovanni, son of Piero Antinori, joined the Winemakers Guild in 1385. This was the beginning of centuries of uninterrupted activity. In the mansion, designed by Giuliano da Maiano, bought by the Antinores in the first half of the 16th century, the present-day cantinetta recalls the places where Florence's nobility sold their wine to their fellow citizens. Furnishings, paintings, everything to be seen in the family mansion mirrors a search for the sumptuous balance that characterizes Antinori wines, which were already well known in the 17th century to aristocratic families and courts throughout Europe. Florence's leading historic buildings are mirrored in the windows of the palazzo, while the courtyard showcases exhibit scale models of the family estates. Tignanello is the oldest of the Antinori wines. The new cellars are behind the villa, with their high vaulted ceilings and corridors connecting with the older cellars. It was by means of alchemy that the Medici ruler tried to control nature and imitate her creative capacities. Francesco I had gathered together all the most advanced research in alchemy and the applied sciences in the so-called Medici Casino in Via Larga. If the Grand Duke was in search of perfection in the spiritual properties of herbs, the Dominican friars of Santa Maria Novella had been devoting their research to the physical properties of plants since 1221. Since 1612, the ancient pharmacy has been selling the products of the perfume pharmaceutical workshop, which the Grand Duke honored with the name of His Royal Highness's factory. The pharmaceutical workshop was once housed in the room giving onto the garden and resembled the one depicted in the studiolo. In 1848, the impressive retail outlet for products for which there was now worldwide demand opened in the former chapel of St. Nicholas. This corridor was added in the 19th century to make a new entrance from Via della Scala. Nowadays, the sweet-smelling creams, fragrant herb mixes, perfumes, and well-known soaps are made using the same age-old techniques, even though the work is now carried out by ingenious machines. The special care devoted to each single item has remained unchanged. The local wool and silk workers made the cloth worn by the ladies of Florence. Since the mid-18th century, a workshop in the district of San Fridiano has been producing very special cloth, both in quality and color. It all begins with silk, that marvel which arrived from China, reaching Florence in the 14th century, when the first workshops opened. The Silk Weavers' Guild was one of the most powerful, and was included by Andrea Pisano in his reliefs for Giotto's bell tower. From the colored skeins, the thread moves onto the wooden spools for the warp and weft of the cloth. An ancient piece of machinery dating from the 18th century is still in use. It was based on designs by Leonardo da Vinci. In 1780, Grand Duke Pietro Leopoldo donated a number of looms to this silk workshop, which are still in working order. These gorgeous silks from the looms with their exotic patterns can be seen in Renaissance paintings. This is where the material for decorating noble Florentine mansions came from, and which is now on display in the city's museums. The very special quality of the cloth produced is closely linked with the slow, careful rhythm of work and the loving care of the craftsman. Florence was also famous for its financial transactions and its early banks. Florentine bankers had been lending money to rulers throughout Europe since the 14th century. It was Grand Duke Leopold II, known as Canapone, who encouraged the setting up of important institutions such as the Florentine Savings Bank, or Cassa di Risparmio, in 1829. The first savings banks were set up during the Industrial Revolution to satisfy the needs of the lower classes and to exercise an amount of control over possible social unrest. A group of eminent Florentines, including Gino Capponi and Cosimo Ridolfi, the first chairman, were behind the move, whose aim was to instill the virtue of saving money. The tradition of patronage of the old bank is now continuing with the Cassa di Risparmio Foundation. This foundation aims to finance the arts, enhance the value of Florence's museum collections, and restore and conserve important historical sites, such as the Bardini Gardens and Villa Pero. The foundation's investments are even wider in coverage in a city with such a high level of civic pride. It is unusual for a bank to have such pleasant, lived-in headquarters as those of the Banca del Vecchio. All the details, from the lighting to the checkbooks, welcome customers with a sense of civilized style. In 1889, Federigo Del Vecchio had set up a banking company bearing his name. Its headquarters were at 5 Via dei Banchi, in the handsome, ancient Ambron Palace, which now houses the bank's one and only branch. The new headquarters maintain the bank's characteristically attractive, harmonious atmosphere. Contacts between a bank and its customers can still follow the rhythms of past times. Photography is now the well-established companion of painting in the representation of the world. This novelty would certainly have delighted Grand Duke Francesco, who observed the world through magic lenses. Smile, please. Francesco would, no doubt, have included photographs in his studiolo collections. In 1852, the idea came to Leopoldo, Giuseppe, and Romualdo Alinari, who set up the world's oldest photography business. The most famous travelers on the Grand Tour stopped off to pose at their studios. The firm's archives have their roots in the campaigns for putting the history of Italy and Europe on record. They can now boast more than 2 million plates and negatives covering aspects of art and society from the mid-19th century to the present. The Museum of the History of Photography is at the heart of the Alinari Company, with its collection of 800,000 period photos. Alongside the photos, printed with the albumen, bromide, salted paper, calotype, and daguerreotype processes, there are also antiques connected with photography and work by contemporary photographers. Alinari is the historical memory of Italy on the move. Its photographers have recorded events and things which together make up the country's and its people's common visual heritage. Photography has been recording Italy's vast artistic heritage and social transformations since the second half of the 19th century. Florence was also changing before the very eyes of its inhabitants. In 1865, architect Giuseppe Poggi presented his plan to the local authorities for the modernization of a city anxious to play its newfound role as capital of united Italy. Piazza Cavour, today's Piazza della Libertà, with its honorary arch and its tree-lined boulevards, was also the work of Poggi. This busy part of town has housed the Fondiaria Insurance Company, now known as Fondiaria Sai, since 1961. The original firm dates back to the 15th of January, 1879. The company started life in Palazzo Covoni in Via Cavour, moving to 17 Via Tornabuoni. When the city center was rebuilt around what used to be Piazza Vittorio, the modern Piazza della Repubblica, it moved again to Palazzo Levi, together with the famous open-air cafes. The front of its present headquarters is still characterized by the sober 19th century air Poggi bequeathed to Florence when it was the capital of Italy. Nowadays, the company belongs to a more complex setup called Fondiaria Sai, maintaining and enhancing its ties with Florence and its own identity through important projects involving the future of the city. It was in these cupboards that Francesco kept his most secret and rarest books. A city's libraries are appointed to its cultural life. In Florence, modern institutions go hand in hand with older ones, evidence of the city's vivacity. The activities of numerous publishers are further proof of this. His love for Dante had led Leo Samuele Olschi to publishing after setting up an antiquarian bookshop in Verona in 1886. Leo Olszki had been in Florence since 1897, and in 1935, next to the large Art Nouveau villa containing his wonderful private book collection, he opened his main bookshop. Florence has been a center of printing and publishing since the 16th century. In 1946, after separating from the antiquarian bookshop, Olszki's publishing house was taken over by his son Aldo, moving in 1950 to Via delle Caldaie, right in the center of the Santo Spirito district. After Aldo's death, Alessandro took over a company which was the only one to remain in the same family over 5 generations and specialize in the arts and humanities. Surrounded by green countryside, this publishing house has a somewhat domestic air about it, despite its busy working schedule and the continuous flow of new books and periodicals. The publishing house's first love is its books, though over the last century it has brought out many periodicals and series. The city's cultural institutions are one of the attractions for visitors like me to this artistic and cultural capital. Florence. Florence is still today one of the main destinations for lovers of beauty. The welcome lovers of beauty receive is on a par with its renown. The hotels in the city center were often housed in noble mansions, like the well-known Hôtel du Nord, opened in 1839 in Palazzo Bartolini in Piazza Santa Trinita, and much loved by artists and poets. The motto, "So as not to sleep," is a proud statement by Giovanni Bartolini Salimbeni, dynamic first owner of Palazzo degli Sportici in Via Porta Rossa, and silk, spices, and opium merchant. This building already housed the inn known as the Locanda del Camello in the 14th century, but it is only from 1848 onwards that we have news of a hotel on the premises. This was when the entrance courtyard was turned into the foyer, with its boiserie and stained glass by De Matteis, inspired by Botticelli. The hotel was now known as Grand Hotel Porta Rossa, and among its guests numbered celebrities such as Stendhal, Byron, and Lamartine. From the Monalda Tower, incorporated into the ancient palace and now a hotel room, the view over Florence is spectacular. Florence's historic companies still contribute to the city's beauty. The excellence of tradition is their distinguishing feature, and the cement that holds them together is the series of historical events, especially over the last 150 years, linking their activities to the turbulent history of the city. This painting symbolizes a dream. The roots of each single company lie in a dream. I have told you the histories of those who have managed over at least the last 100 years to translate their dreams into reality.